Hello, and welcome everyone to this month's Lunch and Learn, Progress Over Perfection, Transforming Mindsets. My name is Vanessa Jones-Black, and I'm the VP of Marketing at YouThrive Educational Services. Before we jump in, I wanted to take a moment to quickly introduce our organization to those of you who we may not have had the opportunity to partner with yet. YouThrive Educational Services provides proactive mental and emotional wellness solutions for college students to help manage stress, become more resilient, and thrive. Today, we welcome YouThrive Educational Services key contributor, Itzel Hayward. Itzel is a compassionate and fierce advocate for love. After serving as a public policy lawyer for 13 years, Itzel left her legal career and founded Attuned Living, a mindfulness and wellness organization that helps individuals heal the sense of separation they feel from others, or even from themselves. Her unique work, based on the teachings of yoga, mindfulness, and compassionate communication, ranges from promoting social justice work within organizations and communities to guiding individuals on their search for personal and professional fulfillment. Today, Itzel holds retreats, classes, trainings, and private one-on-one sessions online, over the phone, and in person with people from all over the world. Her mission is to gently remind you of your individual wholeness and your interconnectedness with others and all of life. Before we begin, I invite you to please feel free to use the chat function to introduce yourselves and throughout the presentation to ask any questions that you may have, as we will leave a few minutes at the end to respond. And with that, I will turn it over to Itzel.
All right, thank you so much, Vanessa. And yes, please feel free to introduce yourselves if you want to unmute and do that out loud or drop it in the chat. We love to know who's here and with us. And as you do that, I'll just get my technology set up here. All right. Welcome, friends. So I'm so happy to be with all of you here today and to talk a little bit about perfectionism. And so I titled this talk Progress Over Perfectionism, Transforming Mindsets, because there are some qualities of perfectionism qualities that are associated with perfectionism, let me say that I think are really positive and useful. But when we prioritize progress over perfection, the journey over the destination, we'll have a really different experience, as will our students. So I really want to talk about really perfectionism in the students who we work with. So many students I work with really pride themselves in being perfectionists. They tell me they think of perfectionism as being a good thing, right? In interviews, the cliche answer to the cliche question, what's your biggest weakness, is perfectionism. And I really think that's because perfectionism tends to be associated with being detail-oriented, having high standards, being committed to excellence, right? These are all beautiful things and things that perfectionism is often very much associated with. But I want to distinguish that, which I will call healthy striving today. I want to distinguish that from perfectionism, which, as we know, perfection is unattainable, right? It's an ever-moving target. So on the surface, perfectionism and healthy striving can look similar, maybe from the outside, right? Both are motivated by a desire to excel, to improve, to achieve meaningful goals. Both involve aiming for achievement as a way to grow or to accomplish something, to have that sense of accomplishment. And both are highly motivated by a vision of success, of what success looks like, often really pushing to perform well and to improve. And while both qualities tend to receive positive affirmation for their results, there are very key differences as well. But before we get into those key differences, I want to start with an apology. Specifically, I'm going to start with an apology to my friend Julia, who a few weeks ago posted something on Facebook, and I haven't been able to stop thinking about it. And she wrote, "If you're choosing a quote for the opening page of your new book that roomy one about meeting in the field beyond right and wrong has already been used up. So I'm so sorry, Julia. Even though it's been used 1,000 times, it's where I want to start today. Because perfectionism really is rooted in this belief that there are two ways to be or two ways to do a thing. And that's a right way and a wrong way. And if we're not doing it right, then we're doing it wrong. And this Rumi quote that I'm going to start with here paints a really beautiful picture of a different way. Out beyond ideas of wrongdoing and right doing, there is a field. I'll meet you there. When the soul lies down in that grass, when the soul lies down in that grass, the world is too full to talk about. Ideas, language, even the phrase each other doesn't make any sense. And when Rumi speaks of that field beyond right and wrong, he's really pointing us to this possibility of a mindset that's like an open horizon, that's vast and free. It's really a way of thinking that embraces complexity and allows for growth and understanding, nuanced understanding, compassion, without needing to judge or divide. It really invites us to step beyond rigid categories and hold space for multiple paths, multiple truths, multiple ways of being, to exist and to be okay. And this is a very powerful contrast to perfectionism's dualistic mindset of right and wrong, either or, right? This either or mindset categorizes situations, people, choices into these very rigid, opposing extremes. If it's not right, it's wrong. If it's not this, it's that. And that's it. No nuance, nothing in between. And while this mindset can be very helpful in certain contexts, like maybe safety guidelines or emergency actions, decisions with immediate consequences, it doesn't work as well in spaces where we want learning to happen, growth, exploration, self-discovery, right? All of these things that are very foundational in an academic setting. In this binary way of thinking, there's very little room for flexibility or collaboration or creativity. Perfectionism, as I'm defining it today, and as I'll be talking about it today, is rooted in this very rigid mindset. And this mindset underlies what we'll see as the big differences between healthy striving and perfectionism. And also, I want to mention, as I talk about healthy striving and perfectionism, I'm talking about them as concepts, right? Many of us aren't purely perfectionists in every single element of our lives. And very few of us are healthy strivers in every single situation and context and project in our lives, right? We're often a blend of these. So I'm really talking about them as concepts as opposed to a perfectionist and a unhealthy striver. I don't think that that's what we're going to be really facing with, right? We're really going to be talking about when we're facing our students, we're going to be talking with them in times that maybe they're leaning into those perfectionist tendencies. So as I talk about these two as separate concepts, I want to talk about the real differences between them. So the first is the focus on process versus outcome. And I touched on this already. So healthy striving really values outcome, but also recognizes the importance of the process. There's room to celebrate progress and effort, even if the final result isn't perfect. Right? But perfectionism, on the other hand, is entirely outcome focused. It's not about the process, it's just about the outcome where only flawless results are acceptable. And any deviation from this flawless result is considered failure. So that's one very big difference. I'm going to go over, like, I think I have 4 or 5 differences I want to go over. The second are that the two approaches, these two principles or ideas, have very different relationships to self-worth. So in healthy striving, self-worth remains intact even when mistakes are made. In perfectionism, however, self-worth is tied to that performance, tied to that outcome. And because of that, there's a lot of shame, right? A lot of shame when that flawless outcome isn't achieved. And researcher Brene Brown has a great quote about this. She says, "When perfectionism is driving, shame is always riding shotgun," right? So perfectionism and shame are tied very, very closely together. And so that's where that relationship of self-worth starts to really crumble in perfectionism. Because there is no internal sense of self-worth. It's all externalized on that outcome, that achievement, and that it be flawless. So on a very related note, the perspective on mistakes is really different in these two different approaches. Brene Brown also makes this great distinction between guilt and shame that I think is a really good parallel here. So her take on it is that guilt says, I made a mistake, whereas shame says, I am a mistake. Right? So that's a really big difference. I made a mistake versus I am a mistake. I am the mistake. So guilt can actually be, her argument is guilt can be productive because it allows for accountability, for change, for an opportunity to grow, right? But shame tends to be destructive. It's really associated with those feelings of inadequacy and self-condemnation, right? That's shame. So similarly here, healthy striving, falling short of a desired outcome might lead to some disappointment, but again, there's that opportunity for growth, for learning, for improvement. In contrast, perfectionism with its shame equates that failure with the person's identity. So, as would be very much expected, there's a tremendous fear of mistakes and of failure. Because if your self-worth is connected with perfection, mistakes would be a huge threat to who you are, right? To your very being. And in fact, the rest of this quote, this Brene Brown quote, she says, when perfectionism is driving, shame is always riding shotgun. And she says, and fear is the annoying backseat driver, right? So there's that fear of making a mistake. So another way to think about all this is that progress is internally focused, right? What can I learn? What can I take away from this journey that I've taken? What can I take away from this mistakes I made? How can I celebrate the learning as well as a successful outcome? How can I learn from um, a an outcome that's not what I had hoped for, right? How have I improved? Am I putting my best effort forward in this? Right? Can I be proud of my effort? What aspects of the process can I celebrate? What's one small step I can take to move forward today? If there's no fear of those mistakes. For perfectionism, on the other hand, is going to be asking questions like, how can I make sure people see me as competent, right? How will others judge me if this isn't good enough? What will people think of me if I make a mistake? Um, how can I hide this mistake I made so no one knows it even ever happened? Right? So there's that you can really hear in those perspectives that shift of focus. Rather than being internally focused, perfection is really looking at the outside and what are they thinking about me? So as you can imagine, and this will be the last difference I mention, as you can imagine, the mental health impacts of healthy striving and of perfectionism are very, very different. Healthy striving tends to foster resilience and long-term well-being because it really allows people to find meaning in their process and the outcome. Mistakes are viewed as opportunities for growth and improvement. In contrast, perfectionism often has folks mired in shame and in fear, ties mistakes to the person's self-worth, leaving very little room for errors, making the idea of trying something new or taking a risk feel very, very threatening. And this constant pressure, this constant fear, this constant focus outside, what are they thinking? How am I being perceived by others? Is linked to a lot of really serious mental health issues from burnout and procrastination all the way to anxiety and depression. So really big differences. On the outside, they might look the same, but the internal experience that's occurring for that in that for that person who's experiencing one or the other is going to be really, really different. Let me do a quick time check. All right, great. We're doing great. So people engaged in healthy striving have this understanding of the importance of prioritizing progress over perfectionism or progress over perfection, right? Healthy striving encourages learning and growth. It reduces anxiety. It increases motivation. It promotes flexibility and adaptability. People might be willing to try something new, take a chance. I know this worked, but maybe this will work too, right? There's a lot more flexibility and adaptability. This didn't work. Oh no, maybe we try something new rather than, oh no, I'm a failure. Oh no, they've seen me, right? And it supports long-term success because of that growth and that learning and that expansion and that creativity and that flexibility that becomes possible. So, how do we help students with perfectionist tendencies begin to transform their mindsets, right? We talked about transforming mindsets. That's the subtitle of this whole thing. How do we support students who are stuck in perfectionism or have these perfectionist tendencies? How can we support them in letting go of the unrealistic belief that perfection, one, is even achievable, and two, the faulty belief that it's necessary for worthiness? That's what we want to explore. So let's talk about that. So I want to introduce 4 principles that can help students loosen the grip of perfectionism and really enhance their mental health and their academic success. And each of these have a profound impact on how students navigate perfectionism, helping them build that resilience, that well-being, and ultimately that self-worth and that ability to center in themselves and take action without fear being that annoying backseat driver or shame riding shotgun. And these 4 principles are cultivating self-awareness, leading with empathy, encouraging self-compassion, and reframing mistakes. So these are the 4 principles, and I want to go through them one at a time and talk a little bit about how we can begin bringing these principles into our students' lives. And then we're going to move into a practice actually and talk about how we can bring it into our own lives as well, because these are all really, really powerful principles. As a recovering perfectionist myself, these are the principles that I personally used to really help loosen that grip of perfectionism and move more into healthy striving, which just brings, not only does it release kind of those the mental health challenges, right? But it also brings so much joy and excitement to try new things and to learn and grow. And that's the kind of energy we want to see in our students um, to really succeed, not just academically. Of course, we want them to succeed academically, but this is really a launch pad for their lives. And we want them to succeed in lives and have these expansive, joyful lives rather than these really rigid, limiting mindsets, which contract and make smaller. So let's get into the principles. So the first principle, cultivate self-awareness. So perfectionist thoughts often become so habitual. And this is true of any habitual thoughts, but we're just talking about perfectionism. As you heard in my bio, I do a lot of work with mindfulness. So this is any thought, but perfectionist thoughts are no exception. They become so habitual that we stop even noticing them. They're just kind of the water we swim in. So the very first step toward transforming these patterns is to become aware of them, is to cultivate that self-awareness, to pause and to notice when these thoughts have been activated and turned on and are running. And when we bring our conscious attention to these moments, when we feel that need to be perfect, or we feel that belief that we are flawed and we have failed because it wasn't perfect, when we notice that, we can start to disrupt these automatic ingrained reactions, right? Just as in mindful practices, this self-awareness opens the door to making more intentional, compassionate choices instead of running on autopilot. And so, of course, if it's on autopilot and we don't notice, because it's just the water we swim in, how do we notice? How do we notice? So as folks working with students, we can reflect when we see it in them, right? We can encourage them to increase their own self-awareness by simply holding up a mirror to them and reflecting back to them what we're hearing them say, right? So if a student says something like, I keep rewriting my papers because they never seem good enough, you can reflect back what you're hearing the students say, right? So it sounds like you're holding yourself to such a high standard that you're not allowing yourself to finish, right? So that they hear what they're saying. So they're recognizing that this is perfectionism at work, right? So the student says, I'm always running out of time because I spend so long on the details of my project. So, wow, it sounds like you're getting so bogged down in the smaller details that you're not able to complete the bigger task, the more important task, right? The task that actually is the one that you need to turn in or that you need to complete. It's just reflecting it back, right? As a student, I always avoid working on assignments until I feel like I can do them perfectly. So it sounds like you're waiting for the perfect moment to start. And if that perfect moment never comes, then you'll never start. Is that what I'm hearing? Right? So you can always reflect back to them and start to cultivate that self-awareness in them. They might start hearing their own voices, hearing what they're saying and noticing like, oh, wow, that doesn't really make sense. That doesn't really serve me, right? That doesn't really serve the project, the class, the idea, the goal I want to succeed in. So helping our students cultivate that self-awareness is a great first step. Then we're going to lead with empathy. So we notice the thought, the student notices the thought. Now what? Now they have a decision. Now they can make a decision, right? Rather than just keeping those tapes running unconsciously, not with choice, that we've interrupted the tape. And now we can make a conscious decision to not let those perfectionist thoughts run on autopilot, to not let those thoughts dictate behaviors and a way forward, but make a decision to lead with empathy, to choose empathy. Right? I'm going to empathize with myself, right? That's what we want. That's the direction we want the student to begin moving into. And one of the best ways that we can support people in holding themselves in empathy is by us ourselves holding them in empathy, right? So just holding the student in empathy, listening to them without judgment, helping them feel seen and heard, understood, right? And offering these empathic, non-judgmental listening spaces and times really creates space for the student to express their struggles and then maybe start seeing themselves as lovable and worthy, right? Even though they are making mistakes, even though they may not be perfect. Wow, here's someone that's willing to extend this love and kindness to me. Maybe I am worth it. Right? So that's one way we can support students to begin leading with empathy for themselves is by offering them the empathy that they haven't learned how to give themselves yet. And then the next principle is to encourage self-compassion. So again, do a quick time check here. Okay, great. I'm getting a little bit close onto time. I'm going to get through these 4 principles. And then I'm going to walk you through a practice that we're actually not going to do live, but I want to encourage you to review the recording and get out a pen and paper and really do it. But let's get into the 4th principle, which is encourage self-compassion. And this simply means being kind to ourselves, being kind to oneself in the face of mistakes, in the face of perceived shortcomings, in the face of understanding that one's worthiness doesn't come from the external, but it comes from within, right? Being kind to ourselves for maybe not understanding that until the time we understand it, right? So encouraging students to be gentle with themselves, particularly when they fall short of their own goals. By choosing self-compassion, they can begin to break that cycle of harsh self-criticism and start recognizing that they're worthy of kindness exactly as they are, not because of anything they've done or not done, right? And again, sometimes simply showing students this kindness and compassion yourself in the face of what they perceive as their mistakes, right, helps them see that they're worthy of that kindness. And then finally, reframing mistakes. So viewing mistakes as opportunities for growth rather than signs of inadequacy, right? That can often really soften the grip of perfectionism. So mistakes are a very natural part of being human. Being human means making mistakes. And our mistakes are often the result of our best thinking or our best efforts at the time, right? And that includes perfectionism. It's the result of our best thinking and our best efforts at the time. And when we learn better, we can change. When we learn in different ways, we can change. So it can help to encourage students to see mistakes in that way, right? As stepping stones toward learning, toward success. You can ask them questions that go directly to that. What did you learn from this experience? How can this help you grow? What can you take away from this so that maybe you try something different or do something different the next time? So shifting from that judgmental self-criticism to curiosity, right? Shifting that to curiosity and kindness reduces that fear of making mistakes and helps students to understand that both their actions and their perfectionist tendencies that they may have stem from best efforts, and that they, like all human beings on the planet, are continually learning and growing. All right, so I said in the last few minutes I was going to walk you through a practice. So I'm going to walk you through a practice of doing these 4 things for yourself. So like I said, I'm going to invite you to watch the recording, pause as you need to, and let's just jump in. We're going to do these practices. You're going to do these practices for yourself. So cultivating self-awareness. So the first thing I want you to do is take a moment to pause the recording and think of a situation where you didn't meet your own expectations. And I want you to write down a brief description of what happened. So go ahead and pause your video, pause the recording and do that. And if you want to work along with me very quickly as we're doing it live, of course, you're welcome to do that as well. And now that you've written that down, notice what judgments you have about yourself regarding what happened. And write those judgments down. Be candid. Allow your self-judgments to come out as mean, as harsh as they're coming up in your own mind, right? And then just pause and notice how you feel. And that's the cultivating of the self-awareness. That as we move into leading with empathy, you're going to just make a conscious decision to lead with empathy. You could literally say something like, I'm doing the best I can right now, and it's okay if things aren't perfect. I can meet myself with kindness. I can move forward from here. As bad as this feels, hearing these self-judgments, I can move forward from this. I'll be okay. Right? And as you do, and so pause and do that. And then notice how you feel physically and emotionally as you make this shift. And then you'll practice self-compassion. You're going to just start with being compassionate with yourself to respect how you're feeling in this moment about that situation that caused regret, right? This might be um, taking a moment to reflect on your current emotions, right? It might be sadness or disappointment or guilt or frustration or even shame, right? Just notice how you feel right now and write those down. Write down the feelings. And then I want you to connect those feelings to the value or the goal that wasn't met, right? You're disappointed that you um, didn't get something in on time. And the value that of that is to be reliable. You like to be reliable. You like to be someone who could be counted on, right? So what's the value that's tied, or the goal that's tied to the emotion you're feeling? And then finally, you're going to reframe the mistake. So once you fully empathize with your current feelings, you're going to shift your attention to why you acted the way you did in that moment, right? Recognize that your actions at the time were likely motivated by a desire to meet a value or a goal. Even if it wasn't met fully at the time, it was there, right? There was something you were trying to achieve, and your best thinking got you to where you are. Just notice that. And take some time to honor and acknowledge those values or goals, right? Acknowledge that even though it wasn't the outcome you wanted or the ideal outcome that you were aiming for, you were doing the best you could with the resources and awareness that you had at the time. And that's the practice. That's the practice. So I invite you, again, like I said, go back, watch the recording, and pause and really do this step by step and begin to cultivate, right? That shift yourself from from perfectionism to healthy striving. So I'll close. I know I'm at time. I'm going to close with a final poem. Julia will be relieved. It's not the right doing, wrongdoing. But it's a poem by Daniel Ladinsky, inspired by the great Sufi master and poet Hafez, about this practice of love and loving and spiritual love. Even after all this time, the sun never says to the earth, "You owe me." Look what happens with a love like that. It lights the whole sky. So we can give ourselves that kind of love to model to our students. We can give our students that kind of love to help them see themselves worthy. And ultimately, hopefully, we can teach our students to give themselves that kind of love, regardless of what they do, and instead just because they are. Thank you so much, my friends. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Itzel. That was just so beautiful. So thank you to all of our guests for joining us. If you are interested in learning more on how to bring the topic of perfectionism to your students, we are hosting a learning lab next week featuring You Thrive content and exercises from our student solutions. I did put the registration link in the chat, or feel free to scan the QR code on the screen. Itzel and I will now turn off our cameras, but we'll keep the webinar open for just a little bit longer in case there are any questions that come in through the chat. Thank you again, everyone, for joining us, and have a wonderful rest of your day.